Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. So easy for marriages to get disconnected. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about why it is that is so easy and what you can do to fight against it and really bring connection into your marriage and into your sex life so that your marriage and your sex life can flourish. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. Joining me today is my semi-regular co-host, Kathleen Chavanis.
So here's the main concept that we want to talk about today is that habits of connection are easy to let go of, and habits of disconnection very easily come into relationships. Mm-hmm. And we have all of the power that we need to make sure this doesn't happen. But it has to be intentional. And if we just kind of set our relationship on the back burner, or even not even on the back burner, but if we just if we're oh, everything's fine, without fail, disconnection is going to creep in if we're not intentionally, actively, at all times, working on our relationship. This is making me think of pray without ceasing, right? And I think the same concept. Guess what? Spoiler, we're going to connect prayer and your marriage and sex life.
It's never been done before.
It's never been done. This is ridiculous. We so funny this podcast.
Just
prayer.
I know. Just a funny side note. Funny side note that last week I had started a book on prayer that's just insanely good. And I texted Ellen about it because I was I can't read this and not think about sex. I can't not. It's just, we have a problem. But it's not really a problem. It's actually very good.
No, and then I bought that book. And I promise you, in a later podcast episode, we will crack open this book that we're talking about here. I bought the book and I read the introduction and I was I see what you're talking about, Kathleen.
Yeah, it's you can't read it and not apply it to your sex life because sex and prayer are synonymous.
Yeah. So anyway, the Bible tells us pray without ceasing, right? I think the same goes for your marriage in that it's without ceasing, put effort into it, right? Focus on your marriage without ceasing. And so we know that pray without ceasing doesn't mean you are on your knees all day long. It means that everything that you're doing in your life is a prayer, right? The dishes are a prayer, and mopping the floor is a prayer, and dropping your kids off at school is a prayer, and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can kind of take that same light and look at how everything that we're doing, particularly in our family, is for the benefit of our marriage, right? Making dinner for your family is for the benefit of your marriage, and so anyway, so it doesn't mean that you're always having a conversation about your marriage and improving your marriage, right? It means that you're allowing it to be at the forefront of your mind and always thinking about how can I connect more? How can I do more?
Yeah.
Okay, that was a bit of a tangent.
I will say
beyond what we were originally talking about.
Yeah, no. No, I think that's all very valid and like you said, just important to think about. Everything has to be a prayer. But in the same way, we were talking about habits of connection, right? I think that first of all, to develop these habits, like you said before, has to be intentional. It has to be something you choose and decide to do. It's not something that's just going to happen out of nowhere, right? On its own.
Yeah.
Of its own volition. With that being said, I think you can get into these habits and they can start to feel rote. sort of like a rosary, right? Like it's just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I say my rosary every day, but I don't know, which I don't because I'm really bad at routine. But oh yeah, I say my rosary every day, but like sometimes my mind is wandering and it just feels very rote. But like that doesn't mean it doesn't have any power. And
Yep.
I can say that we say, it's funny, this is just a little side story to kind of get the point across. But we say prayers, I say prayers with my kids on the way to school, like on the drive to school in the morning. And one thing we always say is we ask our Blessed Mother and our guardian angels to guard our minds, bodies, and souls over the course of the day. And it's interesting because when I pray that with my kids, like it is rote. And I'm just kind of like, usually the morning had been frustrating to some degree. And I'm just kind of like seething a little bit, but it's like, let's say our prayers. And we do. And, I just like kind of go through.
Gritted teeth.
Exactly. And I'm just like saying the prayers and I'm, doing the thing. And I'm not putting a ton of like thought into it. So it's, again, very rote. We had a situation before Christmas where something came up in school that was not appropriate. And my first grader was exposed to it. And when we questioned her about it, it showed, like her response basically showed that she didn't understand that this was a really bad thing. And like, yeah. And I was like, at first I was concerned, like, does she like what? Like, is she like traumatized in some other way that she didn't like realize this was bad? Like, and I realized that no, like it was her innocence. And I went back to my morning prayer. It was like, even though it was rote, right? Like, even though that morning, I don't know what the heck was on my mind, but I said this prayer and it was still efficacious because in prayer, as I was like thinking about and praying about this situation and her exposure to it, I got a word that just said, you pray every morning. And I was like, yeah, I do pray every morning. Like, and it brought me right back to that I was like, I prayed that her mind would be protected over the day. Yeah. And it was this situation, just like she didn't even get, which is why she never came home and said anything to me about it. Right? Like some other kid that outed it to his mom. But anyway, it was like, she didn't say anything because she didn't understand what she was what she had experienced. She didn't understand that it was bad because her mind was protected. And I was like, wow, I will say those prayers every morning, knowing that they actually have power, even if my mind is not there. Take that, go back to what we're talking about, these habits of connection. I think that when we're in them and we're doing them for a while, they can start to feel rote, right? They can feel like, okay, it's just something we do now. It doesn't actually do anything, and we lose the sense of their efficacy.
Yeah.
Right? Like we can forget that this is actually keeping us connected. You don't really notice how connected you are until you disconnect.
Mm-hmm. But then even when you disconnect, you might not even realize the disconnection. Because I think the word creep here is like a really good word of like it creeps in and you like slowly feel more disconnected. And like I can use an example from my marriage. Like every morning that we can, which is typically like 4 out of the 7 mornings, I would say. My husband and I get up early and we make tea and we just talk about our day or plan something or, whatever. Like it just, there's nothing specific that we're talking about. It's just that we're like together, the house is quiet and we're chatting. And this took so much work to get into our routine.
Yeah.
Like we tried so many times. We had to try again and we had to try again. And I had to continue expressing my desire for this to my husband, which as we've talked about in other podcasts is not a problem, that I had to continue expressing my desire for this because he had no desire for it. And that's whatever. Like he didn't want to, and that doesn't matter. Like I wanted to. And so I continued to express my desire. And we finally like got into a great routine with it. And then I had a baby. Right? And sleep was ridiculous. Like, didn't exist,
nothing messes
right?
up your routine like a baby.
Right. Nothing messes up your routine like a baby.
Yeah.
And, like, and so okay, there's 2 things I want to say about this, actually. Obviously, we stopped having our tea together. But I think there was a beautiful grace in that we had been doing this for so long that we had this like great connection that actually sustained us over a long time of not having these connections and not having our normal connection rituals. It sustained us a long time. And so even though we were kind of really disconnected in the first couple of months of baby, like I still felt very connected. But then it was like, then that wore off, right? And we were like getting disconnected, and that sandpaper, right? Sandpaper rubbing up against each other. There was friction, and like we needed to put the effort towards starting this connection ritual again, which it has been hard because I have a 4-month-old now. So sleep is still not 100%.
Yeah. No.
But it's like, I can tell when we do this on a regular basis, we are just so much better. And it's not like we are like actively talking about our marriage at this time. We're not like, how can we improve our marriage? And let's, get to know each other on a deeper level. And let's, go through these card decks about, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those kind of conversations. I'm just saying you don't need them to have a connection ritual of some sort, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so like I can feel the connection when we are regularly doing this versus like I can feel the difference, I guess, is really what it is, especially because I just experienced that difference very actively.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think when it comes to connection rituals, it does not need to be as like, I feel like our connection ritual is actually kind of a lot. Like it's kind of cool that we're able to do it, but I don't think
it is very
a lot
cool.
of married couples are able to like get up together and spend a half hour chatting with tea every morning or every possible morning. Like, I love it. I'm going to continue doing it. I encourage everybody to do it because I think it's great. But your connection ritual can be so much smaller than that. Like, it can be just like spending a few minutes together as soon as you both get home from work, or as soon as, one of you gets home from work. It can be, cuddling every night before you go to bed for just a few minutes. Mm-hmm. It can be praying together, like first thing in the morning or right before you go to bed.
Yeah.
But something that
I was actually
is
just
regular.
I was just telling Ellen that we have a card deck that I just like saw at the store and picked up on clearance. But it's just a couple's card deck, and it's just like prompts, and you just ask like a question. They're like prompts about your thoughts and life and how you're growing and whatever it is. It's not like, there are some about sex, but not the majority in any way. And it's just like a good conversation starter. Like, okay, let's just like sit down and talk. Maybe we actually started over the summer. We had gotten into a routine of taking a short walk. As soon as my husband got home from work, he would change and we would just kind of walk this short loop, put our older kids in charge of the little kids. And it was like 15 minutes, and it was really, really nice. But then the weather got really cold, and it became harder to sustain once the weather got cold. Yeah. And then like extracurriculars picked up on certain days, and it was like you just didn't have that time. So we've gotten out of the habit, and I sort of resent that we're out of the habit because it was so nice. And it would have been this perfect situation where if we had our card deck at that time, right, we could just pick one before our walk, and we could spend our walk talking about it. Sometimes it's like easy to talk about your day or the things that are on your mind. And sometimes it's like, okay, I don't know what to talk about right now. And that's when something like that is really good.
We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. Have you ever had the experience of learning something or hearing something really interesting or awesome on this podcast and then trying to go explain it to your husband, but it just does not come across correctly, or somehow the conversation just turns into an argument when all you wanted to do was share something that you learned? Look, talking about sex is really hard. I struggled with it for so much of my marriage before I started learning the tools and the specific types of conversations that my husband and I needed to have in order to make our sex life incredible. And so I put all of these tools and these frameworks for conversations into one super easy to digest course called Let's Talk About It. I want you to have these tools. I want you to have an amazing sex life, and having conversations about sex and actually talking about these things is what is going to get you there. Check out the link in the show notes for Let's Talk About It, or go to vinesinfullbloom.com/let's talk.
It is, when it comes to these connection rituals, I think this is ultimately what we really want to talk about here in this episode, now that we've kind of given you some background of what we're talking about, is it's so easy to let them go. Like what my husband and I do, we get up early and we have tea. And I have explained to you that I have a 4-month-old. It is so easy
Getting up early
to turn the alarm clock off. It is so easy to stay in bed. It is so hard to get out of bed. Like that process. Once you're out of bed, then you're good to go. I love that time together. And it is so hard to get out of bed.
Yeah.
But again, like I can feel the difference when we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And so we have to, like, I think there's two things there, right? We need to have some sort of connection ritual with our spouse. And then we need to fight for it. And like,
Yes.
I mean, fight for it, not fight your husband for it. You're going to be fighting
Yeah.
somebody else. You're going to be fighting.
There's 1,000. You're going to be fighting 1,000 outside forces.
Yep.
You're going to be fighting the extracurricular schedule. You're going to be fighting the weather. You're going to be fighting, the whoever it is that's trying to come over right now to do something. Like, you're going to be fighting contractors in your house. You're going to be fighting everything.
Ultimately, you're fighting the devil, right? Like, he doesn't want you to connect with your husband. We've talked about how marriage is the battleground. That's what Sister Lucia said, or was revealed to her in all that kind of stuff. Fatima's third secret.
And distraction is like the devil's
not
playground.
Third secret.
Yeah.
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 The battleground is going to be over marriage in the family. And your connection ritual, your 3 minutes that you spend together cuddling every night, that is the battleground, and you need to fight for it. You need to fight exhaustion for it. I think sometimes I really like looking at it like a battle. Like, you've got somebody to fight against, and just there is a reason why it's so hard, and you can just put on your armor. You can gird your loins with the truth. I love that.
That's right.
I love that.
That's right.
Gird your loins
My
with the
husband
truth.
loves saying,
Gird your loins.
saying gird your loins. Just period. In any situation, he can slip it in. He also calls his godchildren the fruit of his spiritual loins. And it's like, that's just not necessary. We don't have to.
Oh, wow.
He loves the word loins. He loves the word loins. And he likes to throw it in at every possible opportunity.
Oh my gosh.
Appropriate or not.
But really, I mean, we are fighting for our marriages. And these connection rituals are one of those easy places to, I mean, it's can be very easy to have a connection ritual, and then it can be really easy to let go of it. And so these connection rituals do not need to be complicated. But I think something that's really important to just recognize as well is when you start this, or if you're restarting something that you normally do, recognize you're going to feel resistance to it.
Yeah.
And that is totally normal. It means nothing against your marriage. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It means that this is a really good thing and the devil doesn't want you doing it. And so when you're feeling resistance to go on that walk that you go out on after, your husband gets home from work, if you do what Kathleen does, when you're feeling that resistance, I'm talking to Kathleen. All right, Kathleen, when you're feeling that resistance, when it's really, really cold outside, Put your hat on.
Yeah.
Put your armor
It literally has been like, it's been like 5 degrees here this week. It's been like really cold.
Yeah, so I really
anyway,
can't complain because I live in the Bay Area of California. It is 7:35 in the morning right now, and it's 42 degrees, which is warmer than Kathleen's day is going to get.
Yes, it is.
And it is
warmer.
First thing in the morning.
We're in like a freak. We're in a freak like cold week though. It's like it's yeah, not typically like this, but here we are.
But the connection ritual, well, in Kathleen's case, right, it can change. It can be something different. But I think if we can just really be intentional about having a connection ritual, it's can also like, I'm thinking of Dave Ramsey right now. I know this is like super random, but he, like, when someone's in a lot of debt, his recommendation is to pay off the lowest debt first, like to get that one paid off. And then you take the money that you were paying that one off and you like get to the second lowest one. And so then you put that money into that one until it's paid off. And then you take all the money that you were paying for that one. And then you go to like the next highest one, the next. And he calls this like the debt snowball, I think. And because like you're creating this momentum as you're paying off debt, because you pay off the lowest one first and you get this like rush of adrenaline and like excitement that you paid it off and you're like, that piece of debt is done. And now you've got more like assets to put toward other debts. And it snowballs. It just keeps going, it keeps growing, and it keeps getting better. And I think the same goes for our connection rituals, is that once we get started in them, I promise, even if it feels rote, right, you're going to generally have this like more connection across your marriage. And so starting that, getting it going, can create this snowball. It becomes easier to keep up with it. But then we have to recognize that it, like, if we fall off, it becomes really easy to like just leave it off and not jump back in.
Yeah. So Ellen, when you were talking about how you and your husband got up and you did this tea every morning, and that after you had the baby, you weren't able to do it, but you felt like it was still feeding you into that time, it makes me think that we can like visualize it as like a savings bank, where when you participate in those connections, some of it is being deposited in the moment, like in the here and now, to feed you now. But then the rest of it is being deposited for later, right? To that connection lasts beyond this immediate moment. So that the more you participate in them, the more you're saving for later. So that if you go through a period where, I don't know, someone's sick or like life happens, there's a million things that could happen where that connection becomes interrupted for a period of time. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a couple weeks, maybe it's a month for some reason, right? Like that, ideally you then access that bank of saved connection, right?
Yeah.
That it continues to feed you through that stale time, but you're going to be taking from it, right? So you need to make it the priority then to go back and continue filling, which takes intention, right? Like intentionality. Like it takes an outside force, and it takes, very clear decision that, okay, we got out of the habit, but now we got to get back in. Like that's all behind us. Whatever that interruption was, that distraction, like it's behind us now. Now we get back in, and you continue feeding the bank. I think I think that some of these visuals can just really help us to make this practical. Like it's easy to talk about it in sort of a philosophical sense with like very intangible way. But when we think of these visuals, it just becomes a lot more practical. And then you can even in the moment visualize these things, right? Like, oh yeah, the bank is pretty much drained. We got to put some more back in, you know? Yeah. I don't know. I think they can be helpful.
Absolutely. No, I like that bank visual. So I think let's land the plane here with a couple of things.
Land it.
Is like small acts of intimacy, small acts of connection can make a huge difference. Like it can be as simple as, you know, your husband comes up to you wanting a long hug and you're kind of like, I have like a million things to do. Don't hug me for 30 seconds. I could be doing something better with my 30 seconds. Like, don't resist that connection because it can be so easy to resist it. Yeah. And so like looking for and actively initiating those like small acts of connection, a kiss, a hug, a conversation, right? And then like resist the feeling of like shaming yourself if you're like, oh, I don't want to kiss my husband right now. There must be something wrong. There must be something wrong with me, right? Like that is like a normal, it's normal to feel that when you have kind of gotten out of a connected cycle, right? It's like, oh, I don't really want to hug him. I don't really want to kiss him, right? And so like when you're feeling that immediate like resistance to some sort of connection, like question it. Like what, like why don't I want to kiss him right now? Like, and fight, like really push back against that want is our recommendation because your relationship is probably perfectly fine, perfectly healthy. There's very likely no reason for you not to kiss your husband, right? Now, if you've got something deeper, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah. We're talking about normal, healthy marriages here. It's totally normal to like just feel like ugh, I don't want to hug you right now. I don't want to kiss you right now. I don't want to connect with you.
Sometimes we're even just like touched out, you know? Sometimes we just have been touched all day and it's like, I can't stand the idea of another person touching me right now. Like, please don't. But dig into that and you have to, and we do, I mean, in situations like that, we have to really start discerning between like our children's touch and our husband's touch, which should be very different. And we have to kind of work through that. But yeah, keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then like, just don't be afraid to bring this up in conversation of just like, hey, like you tried to kiss me earlier and I brushed it off and I'm sorry, you know, I'm just feeling kind of disconnected right now and I'm going to try to do better. It could be as simple as that, right? And that may be a great place to like start a conversation to dig in a little bit more, or that can be the whole conversation. Like it can just be that simple. Yeah. And then after you have that conversation, you're like, all right, let's have a kiss now. Like let's actively fight against this like disconnection, this want for disconnection. And so just keep adding little things into the piggy bank. They do matter, even when they feel rote. Yeah. And and just like recognize that pushback, that desire, I don't know, that lack of desire to connect is normal, and like just push against it. Fight for your marriage.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.